the isolated queen's pawn. Strong, weak, all in one. You play it right and you get an attack. You play it wrong and your opponent targets it for the rest of the game. In today's video, I want to deal with the ins and outs of the IQP, the isolated queen's pawn, a structure that is everywhere, that arises from a wide variety of opening variations, and for this precise reason it's highly advisable to understand it. So if you haven't made a proper study of the IQP and you are sort of being afraid of it being weak, this is the video for you. Otherwise, you are going to regret it in the long term. You'll have to quit so many promising lines because of that simple reason of, oh, there is an IQP there and I can't play it because I feel it's weak. In this introductory video, I'm going to tell you first of all how to reach the IQP. Yeah, first of all, what it is. It's a pawn that has no neighboring pawns to protect it. I mean, only pieces can protect it. And this, for a player who's not so experienced, may look as something really negative, as your pieces will be tied to its defense. But on the flip side, it's a central pawn. It's a central pawn that controls a couple of important squares, e5 and c5, in the case you are playing it with white, because it can appear when you are with black, as you will see. And this pawn not only controls those squares, but sometimes is able to advance. Yeah, pawns are eager to advance, and when they advance, the position is transformed and your pieces get more space. There are plenty of examples of successful advances in the IQP. So when you're playing against it, you'll do right to blockade it. Yeah, by blockading it, you stop the advance, and this is the right strategy. Try to blockade it and later to attack it, but things are not so simple. So first of all, let me tell you that there are two families of IQPs. Yeah, those who are meeting the E pawn and the others who are meeting the C pawn. Yeah, seems like it is the same, but it isn't. Things are quite different. First, we're going to deal with the IQP facing the E pawn, and later I'm going to show you some examples of the IQP facing the C pawn. So now let's see some ways to reach a typical isolated queen's pawn. Let's play E4, now C5, C3, the Alapin Sicilian, D5, E takes D5, Queen takes D5, D4, things are becoming more or less obvious now, Knight F6, Knight F3, E6, Bishop D3, C takes D4, C takes D4, and here we go. We have the IQP from the Sicilian. It's really common to reach an IQP from the Alapin Sicilian. If you like the IQP, playing the Alapin is something that can fit your taste very well. On the other hand, the Caro-Kann, C6, D4, D5, and the pan of attack, E takes D5, C takes D5, and C4. Try to remove the D pawn, even at the price of being left with the isolated queen's pawn. But yeah, our piece activity is something that cannot be denied. And the control of D5, now we're finding an important idea. As white, we're really interested in controlling D5, and we're also interested in placing a knight on E5. Yeah, somehow start creating attacking ideas. C4, Knight F6, Knight C3, putting pressure and trying to convince black to trade. E6, they won't trade. Knight F3, yeah, Bishop B4, Bishop D3, D takes C4, Bishop takes C4, castle, castle, and B6. The so-called Karpov variation of the Caro-Can. Yeah, Karpov used to play this one with black, and yeah, he's trying to improve the control of the important d5. Curiously, this position can be reached by the Nimzo Indian as well. Let me show you how. If you start the game with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, e3, castle, bishop d3, d5, knight f3, c5, and this is the pawn tension that will lead to an IQP. Castle, c takes d4, e takes d4. Now white's dark square bishop is happy because it's diagonal, it's now open. D takes e4 and bishop takes e4, and after b6 we reach the Karpov variation of the Caro-Can, but also of the Nimzo Indian. This is something that occurs again and again and in plenty of different variations. You'll be surprised. Yeah, the thing is that the IQP is not just everywhere, but it can be reached at surprising times from surprising openings. I'll show you an IQP from the Italian right now as a way to start with the family of the C pawns. I mean the IQP facing the C pawn. Let me show you. E5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, c3. We're ready to play the Greco-Muller variation. Knight f6, d4, e takes d4. Yeah, I have a video devoted to castle in here. But now c takes d4, bishop b4, bishop d2. After bishop takes d2, knight takes d2. Now white has a nice center, and the way to face it is by playing d5. E takes d5, knight takes d5, and here we go. Here we have an IQP. So here the d pawn is not facing an e pawn, it's facing a c pawn, and this makes everything a little bit different. For instance, after castle, castle, we have the e file wide open, while the c file is only semi-open. And yeah, on the other hand, this bishop sometimes seems stronger, but at the same time the opposite bishop is also freer than in a usual position of the IQP facing an e pawn. This kind of position might be the worst nightmare. You have the d pawn isolated, everything is traded, you didn't manage to organize any sort of attack, and yeah, the d pawn is falling. This is something really bad that may happen. Yeah, and I want to show you some lines where black is the one left with an IQP. In the Tarot's variation of the Queen's Gambit, d4, d5 is the most typical. After e6, knight f3, c5, c takes d5, e takes d5, knight c3, knight c6, e3, knight f6, and yeah, bishop e2, for instance, bishop d6, d takes e5, bishop takes e5, castle, castle, something like b3, and now a6, bishop b2, bishop a7, knight a4, knight e4, and you can see the strength of our pieces, the activity of our pieces, and how this pawn is supporting the knight. And yeah, we have no bad pieces. When you think of it as black, you are happy because you have piece activity, and plenty of openings you don't. So this is really interesting, and it's not only coming from the Tarot's variation. I've seen it very often from the semi-Slav. Yeah, I remember one variation vividly: knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, c6, e3, knight b7. Now after b3, bishop d6, now bishop b2, castle, bishop e2, now e5, c takes d5, c takes d5, d takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5. And this is a very typical position where our pawn is ready to advance, our bishop is very strong, and yeah, by accepting an IQP, we get free piece play, and this is something wonderful. Yeah, another typical situation is when you face the e pawn, but the e pawn stands on e7. Yeah, as your opponent fianchetto the king-sided bishop, and then you gain space. And this space brings you a lot of squares. Sometimes if you have had a knight, you can place the knight on d4, but you are ready to play rook e1, rook d1, d6 is there. So this is also really a very pleasant position to play. What are the ideas for black when we play against the isolated queen's pawn? Well, the ideas are try to simplify the game, try to trade pieces, try to blockade it, and later to attack it. So I hope you find these ideas instructive. Bear in mind that in the next video of the series, we're going to dive into how to develop an attack as the owner of the IQP. Yeah, today I already gave you some ideas, but the next one is going to be more concrete. We're going to see complete games so you can understand the whole thing much better. So thank you for your attention and see you next time. Goodbye.